Hello and welcome to this video. On this video I'm going to be telling you why I think jazz musicians hate Whiplash. Whiplash was a film that came out around about 10 years ago. I'm really late to the party discussing it, the reason why it came into my mind was because of the recent interview I did with the late great Ralph Humphrey. Ralph Humphrey was a drummer that came to prominence in the Don Ellis Orchestra. He then went on to play with Frank Zappa, playing on classic albums like Apostrophe and Overnight Sensation. He then went on to have an incredible session music career, playing on a whole host of absolutely classic albums. He's one of the great drummers of all time. He sadly passed away in April. A few weeks before that I was very lucky to chat to him because he was a big fan of this channel, which I find a great honour. In 1973 he made an album with Don Ellis called Soaring. I've just recently spoken about it on my video about big band jazz, and the opening track on that is the tune Whiplash, and that tune was chosen as sort of the hard big band track to represent sort of jazz drumming virtuosity. That was the track that was used in the film Whiplash to represent that, and it was also the where the title came from. So this obscure Don Ellis album has now sort of got into sort of mainstream culture through that track. People love that film. I get continually asked, I saw Whiplash the other day, it was absolutely fantastic. What do you think, Andy? And of course, being a jazz musician, we have a different take on that film. So there's this sort of contradiction going on. Now, I think it's a great film and it tells a great story, and I think the message of the film is an interesting message. It's really about how art, if you really are a serious artist, you have to sacrifice yourself in a way to that art, and in sacrificing yourself there is a point where morality starts to blur. That's really what I think it's exploring, which is a really important subject to explore. The story it tells is at the surface of that narrative, and that narrative in aesthetic terms is true, but in terms of the actual depiction of being a jazz musician in a jazz college within a big band, it's woefully inaccurate. Now, Adam Neely has done an incredible video. In fact, it's the video that I discovered Adam Neely through, where he really goes through the details and explains why jazz musicians have difficulty in showing what's not accurate. I'm not going to do that on this video. I'm going to take a completely different tack and talk about some of the wider meanings behind the film and how it fits into our cultural story that we tell ourselves. And so I want to start with two cultural plot lines that we have when art discusses itself. So if you look at books about art, if you look at films about art, art about art, music about art, there are two narratives that have really been taken on by mainstream culture, and they're accepted by the general public as the way things are. Now, for me, these two ideas are embodied in two fairy tales. So there's one narrative which I call the Cinderella Theory. In fact, George Clinton made an album called the Cinderella Theory, which is where I got this name from. Whether George Clinton was talking about this on that album, I don't know. But the Cinderella Theory goes like this, is that someone has this sort of innate beauty, this innate worth, but the powers that be are keeping them down, right? And they can't get out of this. But then suddenly the fairy godmother comes along, which is represents almost like divine fate. And she waves a magic wand, and suddenly that inner beauty, that inner worth, that inner quality is suddenly exposed to the world, and people look at it and go, oh my God, this is wonderful, this person's wonderful, and they suddenly ascend from being at the bottom to the top. All right? And but the evil powers that be try and sabotage this, but that person leaves behind something which is this sort of esoteric line that brings the worth back to them, and they all live happily ever after. Now, in terms of the artist, This is the idea that's embodied in talent shows like Pop Idol and X Factor. Okay? So the whole narrative of something like that, and it goes in rock history. If you watch any film that sort of details the sort of rags to riches, it's that type of story. This person's got innate talent and it's discovered by somebody and they're pushed into the mainstream and suddenly everyone can see their worth, right? This really hinges on the idea of innate talent, that people are just born with talent. It was something I accepted when I was a little kid, that people are born with talent, and that's sort of within them as an essential quality. Okay, now in reality, I don't think that's the case. All right, I think actually what happens is talent is actually the motivation towards certain aesthetic things. It's a love. You know, people love music. They're born with a love of music. They have no talent, but they have a love of music. And because they have a love of music, they pursue it. And they pursue it in two ways. They either become a great listener, and being a great listener of music is a really great talent. All the people watching this channel, all you people watching this who are listeners, right, you're one half of this beautiful discussion, aesthetic discussion that goes on. That is what is art. You cannot make great art unless there's a listener who has developed those skills, right? And on the other side, there are the musicians. The musicians arrive at being great because that love of the music motivates them to do stuff over and over again, and the repetition of that slowly develops skill. What I find a lot with young musicians is that because they've swallowed this idea of the Cinderella Theory, they are sort of trapped in a contradiction. They believe that there's no way that they can succeed because the competition's too great, and they don't believe they have the innate talent. Rather than going, I love music, I've developed a certain level of skill, I've got something to say, what I got to do is now sit down and do the work and slowly trudge my way through to a point where I'm actually creating something that's really, really good. All musicians know it's hard work, right? Innate talent, throw it out. It's not even worth worrying with. You know, people aren't just born doing. I mean, there's musicians who are born with, like, you know, well, even things like perfect pitch. I was just going to say that there's an innate quality, but again, a perfect pitch is often developed when you're very young because you're surrounded by something. It's about the love of music, you know, and I'm sure there's many people who are surrounded by music who don't develop perfect pitch. The innate talent is the love of the thing, of painting or words or whatever it is, and that takes you on a journey, right? Now, the idea that then somebody can come along and because they have a higher status than you, and it's all about status, right? The music industry operates on status. That's the currency of the music industry. So if somebody comes along with that status, they can, you know, it's like Simon Cowell, he's the big fairy of the music industry, isn't he? We've all said it, he's the big fairy there to wave his magic wand with his superior knowledge of what is good. Ridiculous. You know, and he's going to wave his wand and say, you're great. And then because he said he's great, it's like a magic spell. And suddenly, you know, your lovely ball gown appears and your pumpkin carriage and you know, your little mice who have now turned into little slaves that will take you around the place. That is one of the mainstream narratives. Now, there's another one. And the other one comes from the fairy tale of, what the hell is it called? It's the Red Shoes. What's that called? The original fairy tale. I can't remember what it's called. See how much I research these videos. So anyway, in this Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, it's much more accurate because this girl loves dance and she wants these shoes, she wants these red shoes, and when she puts the shoes on, it's like a curse and it dances her to death, right? Now that's the narrative that Whiplash is bound within. And for me, the great film about art is the Powell and Pressburger from 1948 film, The Red Shoes. And that tells the story of a ballet dancer who loves dancing, and she manages to wheedle away into a very important dance company that is run by an impresario. And the impresario, he just is obsessed with the art. He doesn't care about people, he's obsessed with the art. And he lays it down the line. He says, you cannot get married, you cannot have a personal life. You have to give yourself to this. right? But she doesn't. She does get married, and the person she gets married to is the composer of this piece of music, which is based upon the Hans Christian Andersen Red Shoes fairy tale. And so this composer is able to create this scenario in which, when she dances in this piece, which is the piece that's going to make her a legend, right? He has this control, and then the impresario has this control. We have sort of power and art at each other at this moment. And when, this is quite a realistic film, but when it goes into the dance sequence, the film sort of expands out, and it tells this story of these shoes, of this love of this, grabbing her and basically destroying her. And at the end of it, she's so wound up between the choice between a decent life, a nice life, a happy life, a normal life, and being a great artist, that it sort of, the tension builds up, and she runs out of the theatre, out, and she jumps off a thing, falls in front of some bus or something, and she's dead. You know, it destroys her. You know, that music is a curse, to quote Miles Davis, right? And for me, that is the narrative that's held within Whiplash. It tells that story with the conductor being the impresario who puts the art first. Right? Doesn't care about people. And in this film, it really explores the morality of that. Because this guy's abusive. Right? And even though he's abusive, and it even echoes the Red Shoes, because in trying to get to this final gig, he has this huge car crash and he kills himself. He's dripping with blood, but rather than go to the hospital, he makes his way to this concert that this guy's putting on. I think it's a spoiler alert if you haven't watched the film. I'm about to totally spoil it for you. And after being under the cosh of this guy, he then gets up and does his own thing. And the guy recognises his own thing and then asks him to join his band, which I don't think we know whether he does or not. But the point is that both him as the artist and him as the impresario accept his immorality and abuse, because the art is more important. The guy that made that film, he followed it up with La La Land, which I think is far more successful and explores the same areas and is actually a little bit more accurate. I think that's an even greater film. But Whiplash, in that respect, is a great film. It tells that story. And there is a truth about that. I think that the Red Shoes narrative about art is more accurate than the Cinderella Theory, right? I think the Red Shoes tells it more like it is. You know, when you sign that record deal, you know, the people with status that are going to wave their magic wands, they don't really wave their magic wands. They put you into a situation which is going to cause stress on you. I have often thought that one of the functions of music education is to allow people to discover whether it's worth going down that treacherous and difficult path of being a musician, or whether they are the better off trying it, knowing it's not for them, and then going off and having a normal life where they will be happy and content with their family and their kids and their holidays and all that. Because the choice of being an artist is a difficult choice. It's a curse, because you have to give yourself to it totally, right? Now, this comes up to another idea, is that this idea of what an artist is. And I believe there's a scale. At the one end of the scale are superstars. And superstars have no autonomy whatsoever, right? If you become a hugely successful musician, you exist at the one end and you have to do what your audience wants. The more further you go, the more commercial you get. You have to do what the audience wants. You lose your autonomy. That's the thing that strips away from you, right? At the other end is the person that they're the amateur. And of course the word amateur comes from the word amour. It's the same stem. It's about love. You go duty at the one end and love. And the musician who is an amateur makes the music out of love. If you find yourself as a millionaire one day and you decide to put a big recording studio in your house, and then you can just make whatever music you want. At that end, they are completely autonomous. They can do what they want. And there's a scale that goes through, right? And you can place musicians on that scale, you know. So at the one end, you've got Justin Bieber and Ed Sheeran. And so Ed Sheeran wants to make a free jazz album or does some baroque music. His audience will just suddenly turn away. And believe me, the people behind him will say, you cannot do that. You have to do this. He has no autonomy. The people at the other end that are outside of any sort of audience can do exactly what they want. On this channel, we talk about people that are in the middle. They have some autonomy, but some duty towards their audience, okay? And I explore that on here because it's interesting. I can remember watching an interview with Robert Fripp once, and he said he was happy where he was. He said he was glad he wasn't a David Bowie because he's got enough level of fame and success to have an audience and to be able to do the music and create it. But he's removed from the mainstream enough that he can do what he wants to do. But even in Robert Fripp's case, there's a whole bunch of things that he can't do, although we never expected him jumping around doing dodgy covers versions with his wife Toya Wilcox with hardly anything on would be one of the things he's done. He seems to be, you know, getting somewhere with that. Well done, Robert. Well done, Toya, right? But that scale is really interesting because that's the way it works, right? So if that's the case, if there's that truth in Whiplash, if that truth is there, why do jazz musicians not like it? All right? Now, they don't like it because it's not accurate. And what Adam Neely does on his videos, he goes through it and he picks apart, he goes, that wouldn't happen, that might happen, that's nothing like the truth, this is like the truth. In my experience as being the cool New York you know, music school student that's trying to ply a living in the trendy world of, you know, jazz in New York, it doesn't seem right, and he talks from that authority. My experience of being a musician in the UK here is completely different to his. And I have played a lot of jazz over the years, but my decision not to go towards jazz is because jazz, as Frank Zappa once said, is unemployment music, you know. It's I had to go elsewhere, you know, and I had to make that decision, which was a conscious decision to go towards prog. I thought prog, I can do stuff I like, I can explore ideas that I find interesting, I can push the boundaries, but there's no two ways of saying it. There's a bigger audience for prog than there is for jazz, you know. It's like the biggest jazz artist in the world is nowhere near a Dream Theater or a Pink Floyd or a Yes, you know, that goes without saying. And I like that place, I like the prog place, right? We now move on to another thing, and this is the way that audiences perceive jazz, mainstream audiences. So jazz is a genre, and a genre has a smell about it to mainstream audiences. It's not about what it technically is going on, you know. So if you like reggae, reggae is about, you know, sunshine, it's about smoking joints, it's about Rastafarianism. You can picture yourself being on a beach and the people are walking and they're relaxed and the sound's going on. So, you know, if you're sat in your garden and you want to feel like you're relaxed and having a, you know, a nice relaxed time, you put some reggae on because that's what that represents to you. You know, you're not going to put speed metal on at that point. You know, speed metal, you know, represents the devil and danger and aggression and youth angst and all that. So genres have that. And I think jazz, when it is used in the mainstream, jazz represents sophistication. Jazz represents coolness. That's what jazz is to people. You know, it's about being aloof. It's about floating through and having a certain stance where you don't overly show your emotions. You know, everything's caught in. It's just a ride. It's all about that. Jazz is, you know. I've recently done a video which talks about the elitism of jazz, but that elitism is so important to how jazz is marketed, you know. So if you had a film where somebody went to a party and that party was full of the intelligentsia and the high status people, the culturally privileged, you know, but also the ones that are on the edge, the wild-eyed loners, all that sort of thing, when they go to that party, they'd be playing jazz, right? So that's how people perceive jazz. And so that sort of elitism is also in Whiplash, right? That there is this thing that you have to overcome because we're joining a select band of people who have done the work. They have sat there and they've played until their fingers bleed, and then they finally mastered giant steps, and now they've played giant steps, they've arrived, and then they have that moment. And this is spoken about. We're using all the myths of jazz, you know, the story of Charlie Parker, who wasn't quite ready. You're not ready, Bird, you're not ready. And going to this gig, and Joe Jones, you know, dropping a cymbal. Now, what actually happened in reality is this. Charlie Parker went to a gig, he started playing, he made a few bum notes, the musicians took the mickey out of them, and Joe Jones took his cymbal up and dropped it on the floor. I know exactly the context. They all had a big laugh and the guy went down, you know. It's a little bit like this joke, right? Two jazz musicians meet, and the one says to the other, how you doing? He says, I'm not good. You know, did you know my wife's left me? And he went, oh my God, really? I hadn't heard that, I didn't know that. And he went, yeah, and then my kids, they've got into all sorts of trouble and they're running around town doing, oh really, I didn't know that, I never heard that. And like my job, they've cut me to half wages, I got no money, I'm trying to scratch around for gigs. Oh, I didn't know that. But worst of all, the other day, I messed up the bridge on Misty. And the other guy goes, yeah, I heard about that. Right, it's that's what's there, but what's been played out is Charlie Parker was on this journey. Right, he's on this journey. The Torches artist is on this journey. He's trying to search out this thing, and he doesn't know what it is. You know, behind me is an album by Glenn Miller. Right, the great Glenn Miller. Watch the Glenn Miller story. It's the same thing. Glenn Miller, he's poor and he's down at the bottom of the thing, but he's got this urge to find the sound, and then when he finds the sound, you know, he can get out there. So Charlie Parker turns up and he starts to play, and he hasn't discovered his thing yet. He hasn't discovered his thing, and so Joe Jones, the great Joe Jones of the Count Basie rhythm section, he notices this, and so he puts him through a test. It's like a trial, and he takes his cymbal off and he throws it like a frisbee, almost decapitating Charlie Parker. Right, that's the story that is told in Whiplash. It's all angst, and of course, this is fundamentally why jazz musicians don't like Whiplash, is because we play jazz because we love it. Adam Neely does make this point. We play jazz because we love it. We get together, we talk about music, and we want people to be great. There is love. I've always said this, music's made out of love. You want the musicians to be great. You want to support them. Now, this is the point now where I'm going to say what I think is fundamentally what's wrong with Whiplash. Jazz is the great American art form. It was created by Afro-Americans that had come out of slavery, had come through Jim Crow, and had their culture withheld from them, and then had been placed in this country that is at the bottom of the pile. And the American dream promises you that anyone can go to that country, and if they work hard, they can become president of America, except if you're black, right? And what jazz does is it takes that idea of the American dream, of Western liberal democracy, right, and it creates a music form which is unlike classical music. Now, this is the point. That story of having the impresario, the conductor who has totalitarian power over the musician, and then the composer having totalitarian power over the musician, which is then enacted through the conductor, and the sort of stories of difficult conductors and driving people to tears. Right, that's a classical thing because that's the structure of classical music. It is essentially totalitarian in its structure. Right, you have to. There's an individuality there, but individuality is pushed down at the service of the composition. That comes out all the time when musicians say to me, "Oh no, it's all about playing for the song, isn't it? That's what a good musician does." And I go, "Well, is it really? Is it really?" Right, that is another myth. That to be a good musician, you've got to play for the song. And I know in saying this, people who watch this casually will go, yeah, you're wrong, Andy, that is what it's all about. You know, all these musicians just show off. Name a great musician in history: Jimi Hendrix, Charlie Parker, Duke Ellington, Michael Jackson, James Brown. Are they playing for the song? Or is it not their personality that has been enforced onto that song? That song is a vehicle for them to shine through, right? And that comes from jazz. Because what Afro-American musicians do at the turn of the century is they create a music form in which there's a set of rules, there's a set of guidelines, and you have to operate within those guidelines. And those guidelines can change. And you can change them if you're an innovator. But there are a set of guidelines, but within that guidelines, you are totally allowed to be yourself, right? You can completely be yourself, but you can be yourself alongside somebody else. And in being yourself, you are going to pick certain choices that make you chime with everybody else. It is Western liberal democracy. It is freedom embodied in music, right? And that embodiment was fought. Jazz is a history of developing that, and has created that in a number of different ways, right? So if you're a bebop player, you can have your own sound, you can have your own groove, you can play your own melodic lines in the way you want to, but you have to do it within a very strict system, which is bebop. If you're a free jazz musician, then a free jazz musician has much more breadth, right? But a free jazz musician is often, reined in because they can't play stuff which is tonal, say. This is what jazz musicians explore. How do I play the instrument and not be tonal? How do I play an instrument and not have to be within the dictates of strict tempo time? How does time work? How does pitch work? How do microtones work? There's all these things that they're considering. And so free jazz musicians create a restraint, but they create their own restraint. The jazz fusion musicians took pop music, rock music, and they had to find a way in which they could express themselves at the level of a jazz musician historically, but within this new rock pop format. And the jazz fusion that succeeded was not the commercial stuff. It wasn't Ella Fitzgerald banging out Beatles songs. It wasn't that. It was the musicians that were actually quite avant-garde. Bitches Brew, Tony Williams' Lifetime, Weather Report, Mahavishnu Orchestra, right? That negotiation, how do I, as an individual, right, fit in to the group and express myself? And how do I allow other people around me to express myself, right? How do I find that humanity? How do I find that love? And that's the thing that's not in Whiplash, right? It's all angst ridden. Everyone is tortured. Their personality and their individuality has to be repressed so that they can deliver this highly skilled thing, right? And that's why jazz musicians don't like it, because it doesn't ring true, right? My phone's going off again. Right. I've shot 2 videos so far, and the phone's gone off in both of them. And as I said in the other video, there's always people that get really down. One person angrily said, switch your phone off next time, But I quite like it because it's evidence that I'm doing this for real. There's no edits, right? And real life is going on out there. Real life is going on all the time. Right, I have a family of kids. I got to pay the mortgage. I got to pay the bills. I've got to sort out issues that are going on with people, my friends, and all that type of thing is going on. That's real life, right? And any decent person, that's where your focus is. But all my life, I've been a musician, and I've had to balance that against trying to do this thing. And my life has been more difficult, but richer for it. And that's the truth that's in Whiplash. But what it doesn't show is the experience of playing jazz, right? This is why jazz musicians don't care if they get paid, right? This is why they'll take a $50 gig, because they want that experience. It's a life-affirming experience, because when you hear great jazz, what you are hearing is love, equality, freedom embodied in music. And that, for me, is why it's the greatest art form ever created. And that's why I love it so much, right? But there's a set of rules, and you have to understand the rules. And for many people, casual listener, they don't understand the rules. In a lot of cases, if people see jazz live, and they're not a jazz fan, they see jazz live, often the experience of that freedom and their realization that they're experiencing something in the moment that's happening before their eyes, and the future's not set, right? That is an exciting experience. Me being a jazz musician, I have taken that aesthetic idea of worth and I've applied it to my life as much as I possibly can. So when I created this channel, one of the things I wanted to do was be able to put the camera on. It's a really simple thing, this is. It's not about technology, it's not about flashy graphics. What this is that I'm going to come in and I'm going to talk. I'm not going to plan what I do, and I want people to realise that I do not know what I'm going to say next. I haven't got a cheat sheet. I haven't even written down a list of points. Right? I do not know where I'm going with this conversation. Right? I am learning the same as you. I am laying each piece of the track, and then as I lay the next track on, the next idea is forming at this moment in time. I had no idea what I was going to talk about. Right? I basically thought, I'll talk about Whiplash, and I just got out of the shop. I was walking back, and I thought, it's like the Red Shoes. And I thought, that's it. I've got the idea. That's the chord progression. That's the blues. That's the thing. And I'm in here. Switch the camera on, and I'm talking to you now. Right? This is something I think which allows people to see how we negotiate life, because we're going through our life backwards. Our journey is that way. We're facing looking back at what we've done. We haven't got a clue what is there. We have to ride the wave. We have to ride the wave of the eternal now. That's what we have to do, and that's what jazz is. And those of you that understand that, that is an incredible thing. It's a joy to behold. Musicians, jazz musicians aren't brilliant because they know all the chords, they know all the notes, that they have played so hard that their hands are bleeding, and they're so angry that they can punch their way through a snare drum. Now, I can get one of my snare drums, I'll punch it as hard as I can. You will never punch your way through a snare drum. You can stand on that drum and jump up and down. That myth comes from bloody Tom and Jerry. If there's ever a bass drum in a cartoon, it's going to go over someone's head and their head's going to be poking out. That doesn't happen. If that was the case, every time you hit the drum, you would just go through it. You hit the drums hard, right? This is a joke, right? That's how ridiculous Whiplash is, right? But it's not that makes the film bad. It's the very essence of jazz is not embodied in that film. That's why jazz musicians don't like it. And I hope I've explained why that is. Now, right at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about some of the other jazz films out there. If you want to check out some good jazz films, what could you go and watch? Well, the Clint Eastwood biopic of Bird is very good, but it really does, again, go into the tortured artist narrative. It's the whole Red Shoes narrative, that Parker sacrificed himself to the music. He created great things. He had his peak, and then he disappeared. There's that scene when he turns up and there's all the rhythm and blues bands on, and he's sort of disgusted by that. I just don't believe that. Those rhythm and blues bands, those honking, R&B bands, they're great as well. They're all great. Parker, this is an absolute load of rubbish. Anyway, but he then dies. He's sacrificed like the Red Shoes, but then afterwards, he then emerges as a great, and people all respect him. But the thing is at least when you hear it, it sounds real, But for me, the greatest jazz film ever made is Round Midnight by Bertrand Tavernier, which stars Dexter Gordon, and it sort of describes the plight of American jazz musicians in Europe. A lot of American jazz musicians had to go to Europe to find acceptance there, right? And it plots that, and there's a point when after the main protagonist has died and they put a tribute concert on and everyone turns up to that concert, and this always happens in jazz. While they're alive, nobody wants to know,